Let me start with a question that almost sounds absurd when you say it out loud. How does a pitcher with more than 100 career wins, a $131 million contract, and years of being treated as a central piece of rotation suddenly enter spring training fighting for a spot? It's not an exaggeration. It's not clickbait. It's exactly what's happening with Jose Berrios. And if you follow the Toronto Blue Jays closely, you know this isn't just a story about performance. This is a story about expectation, depth, and a recent memory of October. Because there's one thing the fans in Toronto don't forget. Game 7, World Series. And one detail that kept echoing after the noise faded. Jose Berrios didn't start a single game during that run. Now hold on to that for a second, because when you combine that memory with what happened this offseason, the situation starts to make a lot more sense. Toronto decided to do something that for years seemed impossible. Overload the rotation. And we're not talking about just any arms. We're talking about serious names. The kind of names that change the hierarchy inside a clubhouse. First comes Kevin Gausman. Over the last few years, he's become the standard of stability in the rotation. The guy you know exactly what you're getting when he steps on the mound. Then comes the big offseason bet, Dylan Cease. 7-year deal, $210 million. A former Cy Young contender. A pitcher with stuff that simply doesn't show up every day. And then, as if that weren't already enough, Toronto brings back a name that, even late in his career, changes any conversation about a pitching staff. Max Scherzer. Yes, that Max Scherzer. The kind of competitor who instantly makes any rotation more dangerous. And suddenly, what had been a problem in Toronto for years, turned into an excess. Now stop for a second, because there's a detail here that completely changes the angle of this story. For years, Blue Jays fans complained about exactly this issue. They didn't have enough reliable starters. There was always that spot in the rotation where you took a deep breath before the game even began. And now Toronto has more arms and rotation spots. And when that happens, someone inevitably becomes the expendable piece. Even if that someone is Jose Berrios. What's curious is that if you look only at spring training, his performance doesn't scream problem. Quite the opposite. In the Grapefruit League game against the Pittsburgh Pirates on March 6th, Berrios was simply dominant. For innings, 2 runs allowed. Solid command. His pitch mix working. Four-seam, sinker, cutter, changeup, slurve. The entire repertoire showing up exactly how you want to see it in March. A 3.38 ERA in 3 exhibition appearances isn't something that raises alarms. It's something that normally confirms a rotation spot. But this year, normal doesn't exist. Because when you look at the bigger picture, you realize the conversation was never just about performance. It's about hierarchy inside a team that decided to go all in. And this is where the conversation starts to get uncomfortable. Jose Berrios is 30 years old. He's not a prospect. He's not a project. He's an established pitcher. More than 100 career wins. And a 7-year contract that started when he arrived from the Minnesota Twins. At the time, Toronto believed it had found a rotation pillar for years. And at many moments, that's exactly what he looked like. Especially in 2024. A season many people forget far too quickly. 16 wins, 11 losses, 3.60 ERA, 32 starts. That wasn't just good. That was number 2 starter production on a competitive team. The kind of output any contender accepts without hesitation. But baseball has a short memory, especially when October enters the equation. Because in 2025, the numbers were a little different. 9 wins, 5 losses, for .17 ERA in 31 games. Not a disaster, but not dominant either. It was the kind of season that leaves everyone thinking the same thing. Okay, but is this still the same Berrios? And when the postseason arrives, that question gets heavier, because that's exactly when the roles inside the club started to shift. The Blue Jays reached Game 7 of the World Series, a historic run, a Rogers Center that felt like it was pulsing every night. And in the middle of that entire run, Berrios didn't start a single game. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because internally, the coaching staff saw other options as priorities. And when a team gets that close to the title, decisions like that leave marks. Then winter arrives, and Toronto makes a very clear decision. If the problem is ever a lack of pitching again, then the problem simply won't exist. Aggressive signings, reinforced rotation, ridiculous depth, but every decision has consequences. And the consequence of that strategy is appearing right now in March. Spring training, competition for spots, And a name that in any other year would be completely untouchable suddenly appears on the list of rotation battles. Jose Berrios. But here comes the uncomfortable question almost nobody is asking. Is this competition really about performance? Or is it about strategic flexibility? Because there's one detail quietly circulating around the league. Some teams are starting to experiment with something that for decades felt unlikely: six-man rotations. And it's not a random idea. The logic is simple. Pitchers are getting injured more often. Workloads are being monitored obsessively. And when you have depth, spreading innings can be smarter than overworking five arms. Now think about Toronto. You have Gausman, Cease, Scherzer, Shane Bieber potentially returning early in the season after forearm rest, and young arms like Trey Yesovich entering the conversation for extra innings. Suddenly, the equation changes completely. Maybe the question isn't, does Berrios deserve a spot? Maybe it's, how many starters will Toronto actually use? But there's another angle here that deserves attention, and almost nobody talks about it during spring training: a luxury bullpen. When a team has too many starters, one of them can become a short weapon, not because he failed, but because the roster allows it. And that completely changes the dynamics of big games. Imagine a simple scenario. Fifth inning, the starter exits, and who walks the mound? A pitcher with more than 100 MLB wins. That changes playoff strategy. It changes short series. It changes everything. Now, does that mean Toronto wants Berrios in the bullpen? Not necessarily. But the fact that the idea is even being discussed shows how much the structure of this team has changed. But let's bring the conversation to the human side. Because baseball isn't just statistics. It's ego. It's confidence. It's professional identity. Jose Berrios has spent his entire career as a starter. 5-day rhythm. Specific preparation. Fixed routine. That kind of change isn't simple, even when a player accepts it professionally. And that's where spring training starts to carry more emotional weight than it seems. Every inning becomes an argument. Every well-located fastball becomes a message. Every solid outing becomes a reminder. I still belong in this rotation. And honestly, his performance so far is saying exactly that. Better command. Well-located fastball. Sequencing working again. When his four-seam is in the right spot, the rest of his arsenal starts generating weak contact. That's how his best stretches in the majors have always worked. And that's exactly what has started to show up again this spring. But here's the detail that changes everything. Internal competition doesn't have to be fair. It just has to be useful for the team. And when a roster becomes a real contender, decisions get cold. Big contracts stop guaranteeing roles. Past performance stops protecting spots. Only one criterion remains: which configuration gives us the best chance to win in October? And when you look at the Blue Jays' current depth, you can tell the organization is thinking about exactly that. Not April, not May, October. Always October. Now think about the irony of this story. For years, Blue Jays fans asked for exactly this: a rotation deep enough that a good pitcher would be a luxury, not a necessity. And for the first time, Toronto has reached that point. The problem? Luxury creates difficult decisions. And one of those decisions might involve a name that, just a few years ago, looked completely untouchable within the franchise: Jose Berrios. But let's close with what might be the most interesting question of all. If the season started tomorrow, and you were the Blue Jays manager, would you leave Berrios out of the rotation, even with 100-plus career wins? Even with that full arsenal when it's working? Even after a spring that, so far, shows clear signs of rebound? Or would you bet on extreme depth and turn the rotation into something MLB is still trying to figure out? Because one thing is certain: when that decision finally comes, it won't just be about who deserves to pitch. It will be about which version of the Blue Jays takes the field in 2026. The safe version, or the version aggressive enough to try to win everything. So now I want to hear from you. If you really follow the Jays, if you watch this rotation grow over the past few years, is Jose Berrios still a fixed piece? Or has Toronto reached that rare point where even a $131 million contract becomes just another detail in the equation? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate is just getting started.